Hi. Today we want to talk about our section 2 of Savitch book for C++, and that would be for call by reference parameters. And this is the most important part of this chapter. And as I mentioned before, you should have a very good review of chapter 4 before you get here. Otherwise, you would get confused with this part. So we're going to be talking about call by reference. All right, so before we do that, let me bring you an analogy here that maybe is going to help us to understand this part a little better. So as we were working in the class, I gave you a template to do your design document for every project. And that was in Word format. So when I gave you guys those document, any changes that you did in the document, which I asked you guys to answer the question and write on it, it is not affecting my template. So my template still stays the same. Now, if I would have given you guys a Google Doc address, then everybody would be modifying the same document. So it has good and it has bad on it. So we're going to go through all those things. I just want you to think about it, that I have a TA, a student worker who is working with me. I give that TA an address to the template of the design document. That person goes in there and modifies some stuff, and my original document is going to be changed. That's called by reference. I'm giving that person an address of my Google Doc on cloud. But if I give any person a Word document format, then any changes is not going to happen to my original Word. So that's called by value. My original one is going to be saved as original. It wouldn't be modified. And if I want to modify it, I have to give them an address. So we're going to use that analogy to go through call by reference. So when we're talking about call by value, when we're sending a parameter to the function, those parameters are going to make a copy of the original variables, and they're going to send it the variable inside. So any changes that happens to those variables inside the function, when the function is finished, the variables on a function call is going to go back to the original one. It's the copy of it. And that is not the situation that we want all the time. Sometimes we want it, sometimes we don't want it. So that's the idea of call by value versus call by reference. So let's say that we want to create input functions. So after this section, everything in my main is going to be function call, function call, function call. Now, if I have an input function asking the user to put some input for the program to work, then those variables that I'm reading from the user has to come back to the main after the function call. So when I call the input, user input, or whatever I call it, the variable have to be changed if they had original value of 0, and then the new value has to come out of the function. Call by value that we were doing in the previous chapter, it's not going to allow us to do that because the original value is going to go back to what it was. So that's what we are talking about, call by reference versus call by value. So let's look at this one. We are going to look at this function, and then we're going to be talking about it. So this function is called get input. We're going to be asking the user to enter convert Fahrenheit temperature, enter temperature in Fahrenheit. So we're going to be reading Fahrenheit, and after this function call is done, we want to return this Fahrenheit to the main. So what do we need to do? So first of all, this ampersand here, it can be next to double, it can be next to the variable, or it can be in the middle. It doesn't matter where it is. If you have a space before it, a space after it, it doesn't really matter. So we can just put it next to the data type and keep it like that for the convenient. So that's ampersand means it's called by reference. Ampersand means the address. So instead of me giving you a document, I'm going to give you the address of that document in the cloud. The address is the one that I'm going to give you. Now, so when we're doing this, it has to happen in declaration. It has to happen in definition. So both of them is going to have this. Again, me being a lazy typist, I'm going to put it in my declaration. Then I copy that line and bring it down. I'm going to be sure that in my definition, I do not have a semicolon at the end. On my declaration, I have a semicolon at the end. Now, let's look at this get input. Okay, so the typical things that I am used to it and I still want to work with it is my IPO. What's coming into my function, what's coming out of my function, what is this function doing? And I want to do that before I write the function, because it's going to help me to understand how this call by reference and call by value is going to work. So in this case, I have what? In the way that this function is written, or in general, I have what is coming into this function. Technically, nothing comes to this function. I have the f variable coming out of this function, but there is nothing coming into this function. I do not need any other variable to do this function. So so this would be my IPO, input processing output. So nothing coming into this function, and then I have f variable going out. So anything coming out of the function through the parameter has to have ampersand or call by reference. Anything coming out of my function. I'm a visual person. I want to see these arrows. So when I'm doing my design document, I'm going to put the arrows in there. So that's what's coming into it. Nothing is coming into this function. The f variable is going out. Anything that's going out of my function through the parameter, I need that ampersand. Now, I could do this a little different. I could have get input with no parameter and just return a Fahrenheit. So because it has only one return value, I don't have to do it through a parameter. We're going to do it right now for practice. I just want to give you different options. So when we have one return value, my preferred way is to return it through my function, if I have only one. But if it's more than one, then we're going to have to use the parameters. And the way that something coming out of my function through a parameter has to have the ampersand or address of it. Okay, let's go a little more into it. So we have our, let me move this one over here. So this is my get number. That is display 5.4 in the book. So the get number is going to not receive anything. So it's not receiving anything, but it has two things coming out of it. We're going to ask the user to enter two numbers. So when I get two numbers from the user, I have to return the two numbers to my main. So when I call the get number, then this two has to come out of this function. So when I have more than one thing coming out of my function, I don't have a choice. I have to use my parameter and I have to use call by reference. So I need to put this ampersand over here, and I got to be sure that is there to be able to get these things out. Now, we have a next function. I have swap value. Swap value is going to just swap these two values. to be able to swap the values, what do I need? I have two things going into, it, variable 1 and variable 2, and then I have two things coming out of it. So variable 1 is going to have the value of variable 2, variable 2 is going to have content of variable 1. So I have two things going in, two things going out. So that means what? I just use the same variable for both of them, but when I have two things coming out of my function, it has to be called by reference. I have to have that %, otherwise it's not going to work. So anything coming out of my function through my parameter has to have %, or called by reference. Next one, I have show result. That's my output. Generally, my output is a void function. It does not return anything. So I have, let me clear this. I have two things going in, output 1, output 2, and nothing coming out of it. So when I have things going into my function and not coming out of it, then it's called by value. So it's going to be called by value here. The output generally is called by value. Now, another thing that I want to point out, moving forward, the goal is my main is going to be just function call, function call, function call. That's it. My main is not going to have anything. That's a goal. I'm not saying it's going to happen all the time, but the goal is in the main, we're only going to have function calls. So minimum, I'm going to have 3 functions: input, processing, output. So we're going to have minimum 3 functions, but we can have more because our processing can be broken down to the smaller pieces, some more subtasks. But minimum, we should have 3 functions. If I have 1 function in my main, that is not correct. If I have 2 functions, it's not going to be correct. I have to have at least 3, and then I can have more than that. So 3 plus is what we're looking for. Okay, what else we want to talk about? Okay, so get numbers is going to ask for the user to put 2 numbers, and then it's going to read this input 1 and input 2. And because this input 1 and input 2 are the parameters, basically it's going to read it and it's going to put it in these things. So this is going to go change the value of these things and it's going to return. So here I have 0, 0. So when I call the get numbers, my first number is 0, my second number is 0. When I'm coming out of it, when I'm coming out of this, my first number and second number is going to be different depending on what the user is going to put. So let's say the user put 5 and 10. So my first number after get numbers is going to be 5, and my second number is going to be 10 based on what the user has entered. Then it's going to call swap value. So it's going to jump over here and it's going to start executing this. So I have variable 1, variable 2. So my first number is going to go to variable 1. My second number is going to go to variable 2. We said 5 and 10. So 5 and 10 is going to come here. We have the temp. And then we are swapping the variables. So now my 5 and 10 has been changed to 10 and 5. So let's say that when I start, this was 5, this was 10, and then we swapped it, so it's going to be 10 and 5. So in here, so we start with getting the numbers from the user, 5 and 10. We're sending the swap. Now, after the swap, right here, my second number becomes 5. My first number becomes 10. And then I'm going to go to show result, and I'm going to display those things. So the sample run is 5 and 10, and then becomes 10 and 5. So this section goes a little more detail. I don't know if you guys want to know how, or you want to go that deep in there or not. We just briefly go over it. I'm not going to ask you in the test or anything like that. Just for your information, back of your mind, you want to know it. If you're CS or computer engineering, computer, or even electrical engineer, you're going to take assembly language and you're going to go through all these things. The idea is this one right here. So we are talking about the addresses in the memory. Remember that in the memory, everything is inside the memory and each location has its own address. For now, we are just putting the number here. Of course, the number in the memory nowadays is much, much bigger than this. But for the sake of discussion, we're going to say we have an address of 1001, 1002, 1003, and 1004. Those are the addresses that we have in computer memory. Again, these are not practical numbers. We're just going to put it over there for ease of use. So when we calling by reference, when we are using call by reference, what we do is we are passing this address. We are not passing the value. So when we go here, this pair actually is going to be referring to this location. So any changes that it's going to do is going to go to that location, to that address, and it's going to change. When we calling by value, it's going to make a copy of the value. So this 34 as a value is going to go in there. And even if it's going to be changed, when it comes back up, it's not going to affect this because in the memory, that 34 is going to still stay at 34. When it makes a copy, it's going to have its new location for it in the memory. It's going to keep it over there. And when the function is finished, it's going to go away. So that's a brief description of this. You want to know more about it, send me a note in the DQ. We discuss more about it. So we have our swap values. We talked about this function. We have two things going in, two things coming out. So when we call the swap function, remember the calling is similar to what we had in chapter 4. We're going to put the name and we're going to pass some variable name on it. So when we do this, the first thing is going to happen is this first name, first number, whatever it is going to go and put it in the variable 1. So my variable 1 becomes whatever first number is. My variable 2 becomes whatever second number is. And then we are going to, whatever is in the variable 1, we talked about 5 and 10, is going to go to a temporary one. And then we're going to put the variable 2 inside variable 1. We save the value of the variable 1 because this one, if I didn't have a temp, then the content of variable 1 is deleted. We're putting the variable 2 on top of variable 1. That's why we keep it in the temp, and then we're going to put the temp back in variable 2, and that is how we swap them. So we put one of them in the temp, we put the second one on the first one, and then temp back in the second one. When we're done with this function, what's going to happen? My variable 1 pass its value into the first num. So my first num now is going to have the new value because it's called by reference. And my second num is going to have the new value. That's going to be the one we have processed over here. So my first num becomes variable 1, second num becomes variable 2 after the call. Okay. So sometimes when new students start chapter 5, which is call by reference, they think that if they have call by reference, that means they have to have a void function because it's introduced in chapter 5. So we can mix and match. We can have functions that have call by reference as a parameter. We can have a mixture of them. We can have a parameter that's called by value. We can have parameters that are called by reference. We can have functions that's going to return and have these things in there too. So we can have mix and match. It doesn't have to be one way or the other one. So we're going to be asking what's going into my function, what's going out of this function. So in this case, most likely we're going to have parameter par 2 going in, and either parameter 1 and parameter 3 are going in or not. Doesn't really matter because parameter 1 and parameter 3 are coming out. Parameter 2 is not coming out. So it goes in and it's not coming out. So it doesn't matter if there is any changes or anything, it's going to go back to its original value. But if it's coming out, I have to do the and% to call by reference, and we can mix them up. So how do you decide whether to use the call by reference or call by value? For me, I just draw the lines and said, okay, what's going into my function, what's coming out of my function. So in your design, when you are doing your function declaration, in function declaration, there is a comment in there that says what's coming into the function, what's going out of the function. There is a possibility that you have the same thing as in and out. I can have a variable that goes into the function and comes out of the function. So it's going to go in, it's going to get some changes, and it's going to come out. So we have 3 different ways that things can happen. One, variable goes in, it doesn't come out. So that's called by value. I have variable goes in and comes out. That is called by reference. I have a variable that doesn't go in, but it comes out. Again, that's called by reference. So those are 3 different ways of knowing what's coming out of my function. So anything coming out of my function through the parameter, that's going to be called by reference. So when you're designing, which is very, very important to do your design first, if I have one thing coming out of my function, I have a choice of using a return value. If I have more than one thing, I don't have a choice. It has to be through the parameter. So I want to bring you another example. So you go to assist.org to see what courses do you need to transfer to universities in California. And it's going to tell you what courses you need to do. So when you go to assist.org and you pick up the things that you want, those things that you pick up from assist.org, you're not actually modifying the document of assist.org. You're just going to use it to do something else for yourself. So if you're receiving something and you are not going to modify the original one, you're going to use call by value. But let's say that assist.org approaches you and say, hey, we want you to help us. We're going to give you some money. We have some grant or whatever. We want to give you some money to modify stuff that we have in assist.org. Now they're going to give you the original document and you're going to go in there and you're going to modify the original document because the changes that you do is going to affect the original one. That would be called by reference. Okay, so let's look at this one right here, that we have one parameter called by value, one parameter called by reference. So we are sending, we have 2 variables. We have N1, N2, And then we're going to call the function with n1, n2. So n1 is 1, n2 is 2. When we call it, what's going to happen? It's going to jump into the function. Whenever you call a function, it's going to jump into the definition. So we have 1 here, and we have 2 here. So 1 and 2 are going to go in, and then what we're going to do? So we're going to go here. We're going to assign the first one to 1, 1, 1. We're going to assign the second one to 2, 2, 2. So inside the function, the first one becomes 1, 1, 1. So inside the function, the first one becomes 1, 1, 1. The second one becomes 2, 2, 2. Okay, that's what we did. Generally, we have some other calculation, simple one to do. Now, when we hit this right braces, or if we have a return somewhere, it's going to come back here. Now we're done with this function. We are after the function. Now, the first one was called by value. So it's going to go to its original value, which was 1. The second one was called by reference. So it's going to go to the change value, which is 2, 2, 2. So the first one is going to stay the same because it's called by value. The second one is going to be changed because it's called by reference. So sometimes we forget to put the ampersand. So what's going to happen if we don't put the ampersand, it's going to treat it as a call by value. So the things that we intend to do is not going to happen. So let's look at the example that we had for swap value. And for some reason, I forget to put the ampersand on it. So what's going to happen? We have 2 value goes into it. They're going to be swapped. Variable 1 could become variable 2. Let's say it was 5 and 10. So it becomes 10 and 5. When it comes back out, because I don't have the ampersand, so let's say here it was 5 and 10. We go in here, and then we send 5 and 10 to swap values. Now when we're coming out, even though 10 becomes 5 and 5 becomes 10, when we come out, because I don't have the ampersand, it's going to go back to its original values. So the changes is not going to happen. So basically, this swap value has not done anything to my variables. Okay, so this is the end of this. Take a look at this one. Be ready to discuss it in class. Spend a few minutes on it to figure it out. Hopefully you understand this thing just for the practice. I'm not expecting you put hours on this one. I'm hoping about 10, 15 minutes, maybe a little more. And then we can discuss it in class. So be ready to talk about it inside the class.